Okay, guys, let's get started. So hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today at Nortel for this live webinar on the GDPR and Marketing Automation, an opportunity to do better marketing, or talented marketers will flourish, as we've chosen to rename it here today. My name, speaking now, is Ollie Jarenfors, the organizer for this webinar, and I'll very soon hand over to our main presenter of the day, Mattias Jonsson, who is head of the Marketing Automation Delivery team here at Nortel. But before I do, some practical information. Everyone listening, you're all on mute to make this webinar run as smoothly as possible. We're probably going to keep it that way. We would love for you to ask questions, though. So to do so, please use the question tool in the GoToWebinar panel that you're seeing. We won't be answering all questions as they come in. Instead, we'll probably save them for the question section at the end of the webinar. And if your question doesn't get answered by Mattias during the live session, we'll write you an answer afterwards. And throughout the webinar, there might be a poll or two where we ask you for your opinion on specific topics. If possible, please participate in those. It makes it a lot more fun. And the webinar will go on until about 12:15, 12:20 CET. And then we'll leave a couple of minutes for questions. You can send them at that time, or you can send them throughout the webinar, and we'll gather them up at the end. Again, so glad you've chosen to join us here today, and without further ado, Mattias, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Ole. And thank you very much for putting a nice picture of me on the screen here. I've probably, during the last couple of weeks, seen and read more about GDPR than anybody should have to do, unless you're a lawyer. And of course, before we decided to do this webinar, I've come to understand that GDPR will change the way we do marketing. What was a bit unclear was how will it change. I've heard a lot that we won't be able to do email marketing, we will have to erase all data that we have in our database, we need to have double opt-in on everything, etc., etc. But the more I read and the more I gather on GDPR is that it's still a lot that is unclear. One lawyer I heard doing a presentation said that the data directive that came into force in 1995, more than 20 years ago, we are starting to begin how to interpret that. So it's still a lot of things that is a bit unclear about GDPR, and we're still waiting that all documentation will come from the union. But why we're here today is to learn a little bit more about GDPR, and together with marketing automation and the tools that we have at our disposal as marketeers. So how we can do that and how we can do better marketing based on that. But first, the necessary disclaimer that this presentation should not be considered as legal advice. I am not a lawyer, so we will give recommendations, we will give some things that we know, and we will discuss about that and how GDPR should be implemented in your company, and how to interpret the laws you will have to talk to your legal assistants or legal guidance about. But what are we going to cover today? First of all, a little bit about GDPR, what it is, an overview from marketeers' perspective, what will change, and of course the key principles of GDPR. How can GDPR allow us to do better marketing? Talk a little bit about permission-based marketing and so on, and data hygiene and data management. And what to do next from a marketeer's perspective. What should you do as a next step to be ready to be compliant on May 25th next year? But first, the mandatory about Nortal and revenue science slide. Revenue science is a concept that we are working with from Nortal, and the main purpose of revenue science is that we want to help our clients and customers enhance the customer experience, improve revenue growth, and increase productivity, and all doing this while reducing risk. And I think working with GDPR as a backbone is definitely reduce risk. And we do this with 5 different pillars. So we have the omni-channel expansion, building trust-based relationship, work with real-time customer interactions, putting data to work, and becoming agile and adaptable. And of course, the 2 pillars here that we have, building trust-based relationship and putting data to work, is very, very closely related to the GDPR. But let's get into what is going to happen on May 25th. But before we do that, we should mention that there is also another law coming into place called EPrivacy. So there are actually 2 laws coming into place, GDPR and EPrivacy. And GDPR is essentially about how we process data, how we store data. It's not a law about marketing communication, but about data processing in general. And GDPR it came into force, this is error in writing, but it came into force on May 25th, 2016, and it will be enforced on May 25th, 2018. So we will actually have to start following the law on May 25th, 2018. Whereas EPrivacy is, the EPrivacy regulation is an amendment to the current EPrivacy directive. And this do cover email marketing, cookie policies, and other forms of electronic communications in more detail. For example, EPrivacy will cover how we are giving cookie consent. It will cover what kind of consent you will need in regards to email marketing and so on. And so it's a more granular law in regards to how we do electronic marketing. And EPrivacy law may be enforced on May 25th, 2018. So it's still being debated in the European Union as we speak. So we're not 100% sure what that law will mean. But what we do know is that GDPR is an extremely popular topic on Google. I had roughly 1 month ago, I had 5.5 million results. I know it's in Swedish, but 5.5 million results on Google. I Googled GDPR just now, and it was 7.1 million results. So it's an incredible amount of articles being written about the GDPR every day and published on the internet. And the GDPR, the reason for GDPR, it's intended to harmonize the data protection law across the EU. And by doing so, removing the need for national implementation. So there should be one law that is applicable in Sweden, it's applicable in UK, as they will be affected even though Brexit is coming. It's one law applicable in Estonia and one law applicable in Germany. It's the same law all over Europe. And it's also designed to address the technological and social changes that have taken place over the last 20 years and trying to adapt the technology neutral approach to how we process data. And it covers a lot of different things, like what is personal data, what is consent, when do we have to give consent. The right to erasure is an important part of the GDPR. Accountability is another important part that we will cover, and also the lawful basis that you as a company may have to process personal data. So the parts that we're going to cover primarily is responsibility and accountability. That means that you as a company have to write down and explain how you are processing data by a lawful basis. Consent, when you rely on that for processing data, you have to collect that, and you must also store when you got the consent, and it must be unambiguous. It can't be vague. It can't be a pre-ticked checkbox or anything like that. So you have to actually cross checkbox, yes, I would like to receive data from you, or be processed in your database. But what will change for marketeers under GDPR? So more and more precise definitions on different terms like consent, etc. The documented need assessment and vulnerabilities assessment. So you will have to figure out and document why do you need to collect all the data that you are collecting. You will also have to do a vulnerability assessment. What happens if a third party that is not supposed to get a hold of this data, or if you have a data breach, what will happen? There will also be more power to the individuals. So you have the right to be erased, and also the right to know what data that different companies have on you. So that means you should be able to call your telecom provider and ask, what kind of data do you have of me? And they should be able to give you that data in a machine readable format. So that gives you as individuals a lot of strength, and it also gives us as companies the burden to be able to provide that kind of data, and us as marketeers, it really gives us the burden to be able to know where do we have and what kind of data do we have about different individuals. GDPR will also strengthen the collaboration between the different EU member states, the data protection offices in the different member states, such as in Sweden we have Dataskyddsmyndigheten, in UK they have the ICO, and in France they have CNIL, etc. And so it's set to strengthen that and also give members and people of the European Union strengthened rights. What it also does, it gives, it doesn't matter if you as a marketeers are working from within the European Union or from US, for example. It's set to protect the data of all European citizens. And by that, I thought we should throw in a quick poll to see whereabouts you're from, and see if we have people from within Europe or also from outside Europe.
So you can see there's a lot of people answering already. It's about almost everyone already. Just going to give it a few more seconds here, and I'm going to close this poll. So I'll close it here and share the results. Everyone should see this now. A lot of us are from Sweden and Finland, a bunch from Estonia as well, and we're all inside of Europe, it seems.
Everybody from inside Europe. Okay, so it's good to know. And while we're at it, I know for a fact there are some persons, or should be some persons from the legal department. I think most of us here are marketeers, but let's have a quick poll about and see where we're.
So a quick poll about what department we're working in. Let's launch this poll here. Hopefully you guys can see it on your screen now. Yep. It's almost everyone. Just going to give it 5 more seconds here. So we're about 70% from the marketing departments, 13% from sales, a couple of us from legal, and 13% from other.
Okay, so
Nordic marketing departments mainly.
Yep, marketing and sales, which is good when we're talking about marketing. So, but everybody is obviously most welcome, and anybody that has legal advice or any comments on the legal, please feel free to share it, and we will discuss it afterwards. The key principles of GDPR as it relates to marketing. First of all, the lawful basis. Controllers, we have 2 different kind of companies that GDPR is affecting. It's the data controllers and the data processors. And we will primarily cover the data controllers here. That is you, that is doing the work. You are owning your own data about your data subjects. And then we have the data processors, and data processors are the companies that is Google in regards to Google Analytics, or Marketo, Pardot, HubSpot, Eloqua, Acton, what have you in regards to the marketing automation, the owners of the data platform. But we're gonna primarily cover the controllers here because that's affecting you. And controllers must have a lawful basis for processing personal data under the GDPR, and these are set out in Article 6.1 as follows. There are actually 6 of them. We're going to cover 2 of them here. The first one is consent. And this is sort of the foolproof way of working with data under GDPR. If somebody has given you the consent to work with data, saying that, yes, you may process my personal data for email marketing, for profiling, for what have you, and they've checkboxed, filled in a checkbox or said yes in on a form or whatever, then you have the right to do this. Then there are a few others. We have the contractual. For example, if you have a contract with a client, you need to store the data because that's the part of the law. You can have a legal obligation that, for some other reasons, vital interest. It's a life or death situation, usually not applicable to marketeers. Public tasks, also not something we're going to cover here today. And then in the end, we have the legitimate interest, which is something we're going to cover a little bit in here, but it's basically that you have made an assessment of your interests versus the interests of the data subject and sort of made your own assessment and decided that my interest weighs higher than the privacy interests of the individuals. So this is obviously more for the legal department, but it gives some room for processing data under GDPR without having explicit consent. And we'll get into some of the different parts where you can do that future coming forward. Then we have the part where it's right to be erased. We talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but that's one fundamental right of the GDPR, that data subjects should have the right to be erased. How do we ensure that? Well, first of all, keep your systems connected. If you haven't integrated your marketing tools with the rest of your tools in your IT infrastructure already today, you should do that because it gives you a better control of what data you have where. So begin with a technology inventory. Set up an internal process for erasure. If for some reason someone comes to you and asks to be erased, what are you going to do that? And how are you going to make sure that you do not import erased people from, for example, all the Excel lists that we all know that we have in various computers and various emails or around in the office, and especially the, you have the, being very stereotypical here, the classical sales guy that has, yes, I have my own Excel list that I'm going to work with because it's much better than working with the CRM system, because that's what I've been doing every time. And how do we make sure that we're complying with this kind of data within the office premises? So look at where do you have personal data. Also look at where did we get these email addresses from that you might have, or email addresses, personal data. Do we have consent today to process this data? Do we have any old email tools where we have a lot of registry and so on? And how about sales list and Excel list? So do a technology inventory, do a data inventory, and make sure you know where they are, and also set up a process so you don't by mistake import and process data of people that have asked to be erased. Accountability, and this one is very important because it will be upon the companies that process data to show that you are doing this within the lawful basis of GDPR. So you have to write down and explain how you are being compliant with GDPR. So especially if you rely on doing marketing under legitimate interest, you will have to document and explain how you can do that while being compliant. So some of the things that is coming under accountability that you should consider is that don't collect data that you don't need, and obviously don't store it longer than you need. Collect it for specified purposes. If you're doing an event, collect data for that event, and if you for that event collect, for example, any allergies or something like that, which you obviously need to be able to run the event smooth, that could be something that you might want to delete after the event, even though you obviously want to continue to do marketing and you want to have them in your database and nurture them and upsell, cross-sell. But the data for the allergies, you should probably have a process to remove. And document all of this, document your guidelines, have internal trainings, write down your process, obviously limit access to systems for that is processing personal data, so you don't give everybody access to everything. Set up internal trainings, inform internally how you're going to work with these processes, and also and everybody that has worked with Nortal in any of these cases before knows that we talk about you need to align IT, sales, and marketing, and it's becoming more and more relevant under the GDPR that sales is involved in this, IT is involved in this, and also marketing is involved in knowing what's happening with the data and how to work with data. Consent. How are we going to work with consent, and also do we need consent for email marketing? Well, we will probably need consent for email marketing under the EPrivacy law, and you cannot write a legitimate interest stating that it's in my interest to email everybody in the country, and because that will not fly. And you will have to work with your lawyers on where you can use legitimate interest. Then under the privacy law, it may come a part that says that if you receive an email address within the context of a sale, you can use this to do e-marketing towards this person. So it's not 100% specific and not 100% sort of known how exactly it will be. What we do know and what we should do is that there will be need for some kind of consent to process the data and for having the data. So start getting consent already today. Obviously record how you got the consent. So set up a process to document how and where you got the consent, to decide where you're going to use consent for your marketing. Make that easy and understandable. If you rely on consent and give this consent to any third parties, then you will have to name them. Then also, consent should be unbundled, so you cannot share consent. So if you do it as granular to say that, okay, I'm going to sign up for the autumn newsletter, then you cannot send them a Christmas card under GDPR, but what you should do instead is probably sign them up for a newsletter. What you cannot do is give you cannot give consent for everything. So you can't have one checkbox that is saying that I allow you to do marketing and allow you to process my data in any way. So you have to be granular to some extent, and we're going to go into how this will actually and can benefit you in moving forward. Then we have legitimate interest, which in the GDPR it actually says the processing of personal data for direct marketing purposes may be regarded as carried out for a legitimate interest. So you may do direct marketing for under GDPR, and as I said before, you probably cannot do this towards everybody, but if you have a very specific event and you select 100 recipients for this event and you document that, okay, this is the only way that we can get in touch with these people. We cannot get consent before, so we have to get their data to invite them to this event. What you should remember is that if you rely on legitimate interest, you have to provide your assessment to the data subject. So it should be a link saying that, okay, this is how we thought. It should obviously be easy to withdraw from any kind of marketing. So you need to be able to opt out from legitimate interest as well. So it's a bit vague, and it's also slightly more of a risk-taking way. But how to do better marketing whilst remaining compliant? Well, the easy and straightforward way how to do it is just stop sending spam. And on that, we're going to have a quick poll here to see how many of you have ever sent spam. We have a majority saying no here.
Just waiting for a few more to vote. I'm going to close it in about 5 seconds.
Yeah. So okay, let's
close it here.
Publish the results. We have 68% saying no and 32% saying yes. Unless you haven't worked with marketing and haven't done okay for the legal department, you probably haven't sent spam, but we only have 3% from legal. I would say that we have a majority of liars in the audience. If you consider, as I do, if you have ever bought a list from anywhere and sent out an email to anybody that hadn't explicitly said that I want this email, I would say that you have sent spam. And
can I jump in with a question here? We have a question about this specific topic. What was your definition of spam?
Yeah, that's if, for example, if you ever sent an email to anybody that hasn't specifically asked for this email within the context of marketing purpose, I would say that is spam. So if you have ever bought a list, if you have received email from third parties, then is it possible to have the same poll once again? Could you relaunch it and see if we base it on that definition?
Let's see. No.
No? Okay. So anyways, I would say if we have that definition on spam, then it's usually more people saying that yes, we have sent spam. So how do we go from actually doing intrusive marketing into a permission-based marketing? And why is permission-based marketing better? And I think thanks to GDPR, we must learn to be smarter and ask for permission to use people's data. And first of all, with that, we have a reduced risk of regulatory fines. The fines under GDPR is up to 20 million euros or 4% of the annual turnover, whichever is higher, which means that you can be fined quite heavily under GDPR. If we have permission to do marketing, and we know that the people that we're doing marketing towards is also willing to receive that, leads to better data in your databases. And if we have better data in our databases, we can do more relevant messages to relevant persons. Better data also leads to better possibilities to analyze. So if we don't have 30% of data in the database that is junk or that haven't interacted with us in any way, we can actually do better analysis. We will also get interactions with people that wants to interact with us. And based on that, for example, if we with marketing automation, we know most marketing automation system pays or is charging for the number of contacts in the database. So if we can reduce the number of contacts that we have in the database because they are just lying there because we've imported them from a list, we will get a higher ROI on the interactions with the people that we have, and we can do better marketing. And also one more thing here, that we won't receive any spam. So no more spam coming to us and no more spam sending out. So what to think about under permission-based marketing? Well, you have to work smart with campaigns. You should combine the inbound with outbound. You have to get permission, obviously, to do marketing. And explain what you will do with the data. Get permission online and offline. How can you get permission when you're at the event, for example, to do that? It should be simple and unambiguous, so everybody understands how you're going to use the data. And then, obviously, you need to value these permissions. Once somebody has given you a permission, you should value that. We have to work with nurture. When we have received permissions, we should nurture the leads. We should get people into the database so we actually can work with them. And then obviously we have to work with data hygiene. And what I've shown this picture, and you have probably seen this picture in many different versions, and I've shown it since, I don't know, 10 years back or something like that, that you have something you want to say, there is something that your customers want to talk about, and you have to combine this and actually find a way to do campaigns that is within this small part in the middle here. So you talk about relevant things for your clients. You have to be smarter when you use different channels. So we will in Europe become better of using other channels than email blasts. So we have to think about, for example, LinkedIn Sales Navigator. We have to work with Google AdWords and account-based marketing and web personalization and social selling and so on. So we have to use and we have to learn to use different tools, and this will give us a competitive edge compared to our US colleagues who have been sort of the front runners for marketing for many years. Based on the fact that we actually have to move towards permission-based marketing, I see an opportunity for European marketeers to be smarter and better and in being the front runners. And we have to deliver value to our clients for our leads. So when we deliver value for the leads, this will start leading to trust. And if you have trusts from your persons, they are 50% more inclined to give you and allow you to use their personal data for your marketing interest. And trust obviously leads to better data, because if you have better data, then you can use that and you can use it correctly, and you can target leads and prospects and clients in a better way. So you will get better insights and you will be able to do smarter marketing. And you can obviously see where this is going back. Better insights leads to better client value. So the better we do in delivering value to our clients, the better off we are. Getting permission. I've seen a lot of different ways to get permissions. I've done some while doing research for this webinar, and I know this is in Swedish, but it's Alfa Romeo, and they have here consent according to well, the Swedish version of GDPR, that's in current place. Marketing activities, I approve, I do not approve. Profiling activities, I approve, I do not approve. Transfer to third party for marketing activities. And it's same here. So they have an extremely granular consent. And obviously if they get it, they can use it. But maybe we don't want to be as granular. So maybe we want to, for example, rely on legitimate interest for profiling activities, because that could be one thing where we rely on legitimate interest, unless EPrivacy comes along and states something else when that will come in force. Then we have other versions that I've seen, and I think these are quite okay. Here we have slightly granular. How would you like to communication preferences? And I agree to the terms and conditions. You must accept the terms and conditions to be able to sign up for this. And then contact permissions. And then you have yes, please, and no thanks. So you can't leave it blank. Otherwise, it's much easier if you have a checkbox. And for the terms and conditions, if you have that obviously has to be checkboxed for them to be able to fill out the form. But if you have marketing consent, if that's super easy to leave that blank. But if you have yes, please, or no thanks, then you can. They have to make an active choice at least. And here, another way of doing it, I agree to the terms and conditions and join our mailing list. And H&M actually had a quite nice sign up for the newsletter, get exclusive offers, blah, blah, blah. For a more personal newsletter, fill out your gender, and I also want to updates and where do I live. and then checkbox here. By clicking subscribe, I accept. And then here for signing up for the webinar about GDPR, we do not have a checkbox yet, so we will have to see if we can rely on legitimate interest for processing the data under the GDPR. But you obviously need to take care of your own leads. So back here again, deliver value to the clients. Just because you have received the consent in the beginning, do not spam them, but do really, really good nurture with them and measure the nurture program. A little bit about data hygiene, because that is obviously something that you're gonna get out of collecting data, storing data, and processing data with consent under GDPR. And you will get even better. You get more measurements because you will get what campaigns are generating leads, what sources are generating leads, highest engagement rates, the highest unsubscribe rates. That's going to be super important moving forward. Where do we have the unsubscribe rates? Because if someone has opted out, you're not allowed to do marketing towards them. And that is, you can't, if somebody has opted out, you cannot sort of move from consent-based to legitimate interest, and you cannot do the other way around. If they opted out from legitimate interest, you cannot move to consent-based marketing after that. So, keep track of your unsubscribe rates. And if you can, see why do individuals opt out? Can you get them to opt down instead of opting out? So, clean up your database. So, go in and have a look at the database already today. Where did you get this? How big percentage of your database today is list imports? How big percentage of your database has had no interactions at all with you? Can you go in and see that? Then you should, go in and clean it up, delete the ones that you don't have in there. Because that will, you will have better success rates in your campaigns and more relevant communication for your customers. A preference center. Build a preference center. Do it already today if you don't have one. Promote your preference center. It should be one of your more important central channels because it's helped you to build trust. If you can show your client what kind of data you're using and also what kind of data or marketing that they want to subscribe to, and how you use the data. If you can show that, you're building trust, and we've learned what trust leads to. Make updates easy. What's relevant for me? What frequency do I want it in? Which channels do I want it in? Can I opt down? Can I quit receiving email marketing for 3 months or something like that? Can you give sneak peeks of how different marketing communications might look like? And obviously, if you cannot do all of the above immediately, do something. And here we have started. So we are allowing our clients to subscribe to content and events, and yes or no, and go in there. And we are looking into doing this better and more granular for our visitors and our clients, so that they should be able to subscribe to different areas of content and so on. Subscription management. If somebody wants information about events, send them only information about events. And if they have opted in for the autumn newsletter, send them only information about the autumn newsletter. And make sure that you have processes in your marketing automation tools that will adhere to these rules. Closed loop, make sure your systems are integrated. If you collect data on the web, it should be in the marketing automation system and also in the CRM, and vice versa. So any data that sales enter into CRM should be in the marketing automation platform. So if somebody unsubscribes via phone call, for example, and sales take that, stop sending me marketing newsletter, then that should be reflected in the marketing automation system, and it should be here to there. So what to do next? Well, first of all, you need to consider where you're going to use consent and where you're going to use legitimate interest, and that's something, a dialogue that you will have to have with your legal department. Recommendation is still valid: stop sending spam. Don't do that. Rely on legitimate interest for smaller batches where you see it's virtually impossible for you to penetrate a previously uncharted market or something like that. But document it before. And if you communicate with clients based on legitimate interest, make sure you include a link to where you've done the assessment. But if we look at the marketing priorities that you should have, first of all, define a compliance plan. Start doing that already. Take the most advantages of the current databases. You can do smaller targeted opt-in campaigns to, this is very important, to clients that have previously not unsubscribed. So you're not allowed to do an opt-in campaign to the ones that have opted out already. Make sure that you achieve and document compliance by May 25th, 2018. Do marketing with a permission-based marketing perspective. So, take an action plan here. Opt in on all forms. That where you rely on consent, you should have opt-in on all forms. Set up a preference center and promote it everywhere. Review and document internal processes. Write understandable opt-in. You cannot hide yourself behind legal mumbo-jumbo. It has to be easy, understandable. Your mother should be able to understand what she's signing up for. So rewrite your privacy pages. Review your legacy data and market inventory. Set up processes. Should someone, for some reason, ask to access the information or the right to be erased, do an inventory of who has access to what systems in your Look at opt-in campaigns if you can do that. Do reactivation and consent campaigns where applicable right now, and then check with your legal team some of how to the process for data breach, and assign a data protection officer if that's needed for you, and legitimate interest. How can you use that, and how is that going to be valid for you? So we also have a sort of compliance checklist here. I assume we will share the presentation afterwards.
Yes.
Yes. So you will get this. Obviously, we at Nortel, this is also the mandatory slide here. So we can help you with data inventory and opt-in processes and such stuff like that. We also have a deep scan tool. I'm not going to talk about that, but you should definitely Google it. It's something our Nortal Estonian colleagues have developed that will actually go in and analyze all data within your systems and see where do you have personal data. And it looks for personal identification number, email addresses, first name, last name, and such, which will give you will do the data inventory for you in a very structured and nice way. I was super impressed when I saw it. It was pretty awesome. So now, Olle, have we received any questions during the presentation?
Yeah, we had a few questions. You're still very welcome to send them in. We'll keep going for something 8-9 minutes if we have the time. One question that's been touched upon a lot during your talk here, Matthias, about the relationship between legitimate interest and consent. Maybe you've spoken a lot about it from the marketing side, but is there anything you can say about it? Doesn't it, in a way, defeat the purpose that was the GDPR initially, or how do you see that?
The legitimate interest, it's phrased with obviously with as lawyers would write it. So it gives you the possibility to do process data where all other where you've looked at the possibilities, the other possibilities, for example, consent or contractual or legal basis, and if you've covered those and see that, okay, this is not possible because it would be too expensive for me to get consent, and it would completely defeat the purpose of my own business. And then you take into consideration the rights of the data subjects that you're going to the data you're going to process, and it's not super simple, but I would say that there is definitely parts where you can rely on legitimate interest. For example, the data that you have in your database as of today, you could rely on legitimate interest for maybe, and this here legal team check this for processing that data. So to be on the safe side, you can always rely on consent, and if you get consent, then you store that we got consent in this form, fill out here, then you're 100% safe. If you rely on legitimate interest and don't do it in a super broad spectrum, but in a narrow spectrum or limited persons, or in a way that you can actually show that I have considered how my needs, and I've considered the needs of the data subjects, and come to the conclusion. So, but always include, you always have to include this sort of assessment before.
Yeah. Great, that's a vast subject there. Let's throw in another question. What are the biggest differences between B2C marketing and B2B marketing in regards to the GDPR, the handling of personal data versus contact information from a company and so on? Do the same rules apply, or is it different?
The same rules do apply. So under GDPR, the data subjects GDPR do not care whether you are an individual or an individual working at a company. Then we might have the new EPrivacy law that is coming into place that say that, okay, if you want to do email marketing in the context of a sale towards a business entity, then you may be able to do this. So it's slightly not it's slightly confusing still, especially in regards to the privacy and how that's going to affect us. Safe bet is that under GDPR, if you have first name, last name at a company email address, then that should be treated. That's no different from my personal email address or me as from a B2C perspective. So B2C and B2B under GDPR is exactly the same.
Got it. Okay. Here's a quite common question, I think, that I've asked myself. What about your database of existing customers who haven't yet given their consent online or offline? are we still allowed to send newsletters or marketing information towards them if they're customers?
If they are customers, I would say, and this also here, once again, check with your legal team. This, I'm not a lawyer. I would say it's okay if they are clients and you have had interactions with them before, because that would definitely be under legitimate interest, or you might even have it under the contractual basis, that you have the contract in place to process their data. If they've opted out, obviously that trumps any sort of contractual base or legitimate interest that you may have. So if they've unsubscribed, don't do marketing towards them. If you, though, have a bought list, even if you bought it before May 25th next year, the same rules will apply to this bought list as if you were to buy it after May 25th next year. So there you would have to consider more. Consider it more if you can rely on legitimate interest to communicate with the bought list or not.
Right. Okay, so 2 more minutes here. Let's have one last question. This one is about, I guess, how long you're allowed to keep personal data or lead data in a scenario where you have long and complex sales cycles, and marketing team might want to set up long lead nurturing programs.
Yep.
For, in speech marks, no other purpose than to maintain the relationship.
Yep.
What are the rules of how you're allowed to keep them?
It goes also under accountability, because if you are sort of allowed to keep the data no longer than you actually need to keep it, but if you can document and say that our sales cycles are in general 3 years and we need to communicate with the people under a 3-year period, and you document and you write it down and say that this is, then should be perfectly fine. If you have a shorter sales cycle, then so it's all about the documentation and consideration based on your needs compared to the needs of the data subject.
Got it. Okay, I think that's all we're going to have time for today. Thank you, Matthias, and thank you everyone who's been listening. Very happy to have had you along with us. With the questions that haven't been answered, we'll send out answers.
We will try.
We will try to. We will.
Yeah.
Once you close the window that you're in now, there's a very brief survey about this webinar. We'd be really happy if you take the time to fill in.
Final comments, just, stop sending spam.
Stop sending spam is the lesson for the day. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day. Bye.